Hello and welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Layo Adegoke. We begin in Somalia, where heavy gunfire has been reported in the capital, Mogadishu, as a group of opposition leaders defied a government ban on public gatherings and held protests. Security forces have closed most roads in the city over the planned protests. The opposition parties want President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo to leave office after his term ended last week without the election of a successor. Local media reports that there's been heavy gunfire in several parts of the city and that international flights at the Aden Ade International Airport in the capital have also been suspended. Meanwhile, hours before the reported shootings, the Somali government says militiamen attacked army positions in the capital close to the presidential palace. However, according to the security minister, the attack had been repelled. Now, President Farmajo's term expired last week without the selection of a successor, throwing Somalia into a political crisis. In the meantime, the United Nations is expressing deep concern over the clashes in Somalia between the opposition and security forces. The envoy in the country has called for calm and restraint by all parties involved and also urges for dialogue. The United Nations and the African Union are asking the Somali leaders to resume talks to resolve the impasse on how to proceed with elections. Away from Somalia, the African Union's special envoy to Sudan has arrived in Khartoum to diffuse mounting tensions between Sudan and Ethiopia. Ambassador Mohamed Lebat arrived at Khartoum, the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, on Thursday, and has met with Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and the head of the Transitional Military Council, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah Burhan. He's also met Sudan's first Vice President, Lieutenant General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo. Now, Sudan and Ethiopia, they accuse each other of acts of aggression after clashes erupted last year over an area of fertile land settled by Ethiopian farmers that Sudan says lies within its territory. The two countries are also yet to agree on the construction of a huge dam on the Nile River. Ethiopia is accusing Sudan of provoking a conflict between the two countries, which has seen a rise in tension due to that border dispute. Now, this escalation of tension comes at a time when Ethiopia's stability is under strain due to the conflicts in the northern Tigray region. Well, let's speak now to a Sudanese journalist joining us now from Khartoum, Mohamed Alamin. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa. What more can you tell us about, this meeting between the AU envoy and Sudanese leaders?
Yes, actually, the special AU envoy, Mr. Labad, has arrived at Khartoum and begins his meetings with the Sudanese officials, including the General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the Sudanese Sovereign Council, and the Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok. Most of the talks were focused on the disputes on the border between Ethiopia and Sudan, and this conflict is now becomes regional because still Ethiopia believes that Sudan, Egypt is behind the scene and pushing Sudan to confront with Ethiopia. This comes as well in conjunction with the visit of the Saudi Arabia Minister of African Affairs. So it looks a lot of efforts are put in here in the same stream to push forward for the diplomatic resolution for this conflict. Also Sudan has another big disputes with Ethiopia recently over the second filling of the Nile Dam. and Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok has led 2 days ago has led a high official, high formal meeting to assess the potential consequences of the second filling of the Ethiopian dam. So a lot of dynamics is going on between Sudan and Ethiopia these times.
All right, then. So with this effort from the African Union, what is their plan in resolving this?
Yes, actually, there is no way unless the two sides back to the negotiation table and accept the diplomatic way of solving this problem. You know, the main plan is to back to the border demarcation agreement between the two countries, putting marking the main points on the border, as well as pushing forward for the diplomatic talks.
Right.
And diplomatic talks and accept the mediators who are exerting a lot of efforts from both sides, the African Union and the other Gulf countries from the Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates.
All right, then. We'll just have to keep our eyes on Sudan and see how it all pans out. Thank you so much, Mohamed Alamin, Sudanese journalist. Thank you once again. Well, we also have an African affairs analyst, Achike Chude, who is going to will continue the analysis on Sudan. How, Mr. Achike, if you can hear me, we know the AU envoy has met with, Sudanese leaders. What do you think should be the bane of their discussion, especially in resolving this row, this border row? Mr. Achike, I hope you can hear me. I was just asking about what you think should be the crux of the discussion between the AU and Sudanese leaders in resolving this border row with Ethiopia, Sudan and Ethiopia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please continue.
Yes, well, I think, look, the disputes between Ethiopia and Sudan has been historical. So this is not a new thing. They have always had a long history of reconciliations and quarrels and all that. And somehow they have not, an all-out war has never broken out. So there is a possibility, if you look at precedents, there is a very strong possibility that they could settle their matter. After all, even before now, they had been discussing, especially with regards to the border dispute around El Fashaga. They have been discussing long before now. And I think both countries are not averse to this discussion. While Sudan is talking more about the need to respect their territorial self-sovereignty, the Ethiopian government is talking more about compensation for Ethiopian farmers that have been allowed over the years for decades to settle, by the Sudanese government. So there is a common ground for discussion for them to arrive at a peaceful path resolution to what is going on. And I think that what the AU needs to do is to, push them along that path. The body language from both countries is indicative of the fact that they do not want an all-out conflict between both countries, and that is a good thing. So they need to consolidate on all those, aspects of, trying to ensure proper border demarcation, which both sides had already been working on and agreed on. And then the issue of compensation that Ethiopia, talks about. Obviously, we know that the Sudanese have had to pursue Ethiopian farmers away from the farmlands being occupied by Ethiopian, farmers in the first place. So I think this is the issue. And then also raise the prospect of both sides suffering heavy losses if they allow this matter to devolve into conflict.
All right, then. Thank you so much, African Affairs Analyst Achike Chudo. Thank you for your time on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Moving on to other stories, Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune has called for early elections. Now, in a live television address on Thursday night, he also announced the dissolution of the lower house of parliament a year ahead of schedule and said there will be a government reshuffle within the next 48 hours. He's also ordered the release of about 60 people who formed part of the Iraq protest movement that forced his predecessor, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, from power in 2019. President Tebboune said the dissolution of parliament was linked to constitutional reforms introduced in November last year, aimed at giving members of parliament more powers. South African Labour leaders affiliated to the health sector have lined up for the COVID-19 vaccine as the rollout enters day 3. They tell it's their way of expressing confidence in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine rollout, which began in the country on Wednesday. They also hope that the country and Africa as a continent will develop more local capacity to produce vaccines instead of importing at exorbitant costs.
In Gauteng province, getting in line for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine at the Steve Biko Academic Hospital in Pretoria, the Labour leaders say they are throwing their weight behind government's efforts to combat and prevent COVID-19 while protecting the health workers who had been working without protection. But they also hope African countries would improve local capacity to develop and produce vaccines themselves.
This is a mammoth task. It's certainly not an easy undertaking. However, what the government has demonstrated is sheer keenness to deliver this vaccine to every citizen. So I think we must give them some credit. They are trying their level best, and as union, we want to support those efforts.
Everything is fine, and we say our members can have this vaccine. Like I said, at least it is tested in our own country by our own people. The only thing that one still is yelling for is these factories must be internal as well. We shouldn't be waiting for something to be flown from elsewhere. Except for the delivery or the manufacturing of here. We expect our scientists to be on par, not to be testing other people's things. Why can't they themselves come up with a vaccine which is suitable for our conditions?
More batches of the vaccines are expected in the next weeks, and added to the Johnson & Johnson would be the Pfizer vaccine, which has been trialled in South Africa. Most of these would still go to the health workers as part of phase 1 of the rollout plan. We asked their union leaders if the working conditions which they had been protesting about have improved at this point.
The conditions have not changed. You may find different things here because it's an academic hospital, but the reality is that the condition in which our members are working under, we can never be happy about it. Never.
Certainly more still has to be done, and we're hopeful that with the advent of NHI coming, we'll see better working conditions. But as it stands, we're still working in seriously overcrowded facilities, understaffed.
Elsewhere, KwaZulu-Natal province received its own batch of 10,800 doses of the vaccine for the provincial rollout, which began on Thursday. A picture replicated in other provinces. KwaZulu-Natal currently has the highest number of active COVID-19 cases in the country, while Gauteng province remains the epicenter. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Welcome to our Africa Tech segment. For several years, there have been growing conversations on how women and girls can be empowered to participate in STEM-related fields. Globally, there exists a gender gap in science and technology, with statistics from UNESCO Science Report stating that women still account for 28% of engineering graduates and 40% of graduates in computer science and informatics. And now this is despite a shortage of skills in technological fields that drive the fourth industrial revolution. With the COVID-19 pandemic, it has now become more important to recognize women's contributions in science and technology and also widen the existing gender disparities to keep women in the STEM career. Well, joining us now for more on our Africa Tech segment is Dr. Nisreen El Hashimite. She's the Princess of Mauritius and the Executive Director of the Royal Academy of Science International Trust. It's a pleasure to have you on Network Africa. Let's begin with the awareness and recognition for women and girls in science. Now, this began to make waves only a few years ago. Do you feel that before now, the world had lost a large percentage of knowledge about the contribution of women and girls in science?
Well, actually, when I started, when I applied for the President of General Assembly, Kotesa, President Kotesa, requesting to proclaim February 11 as the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. It was all about to bring recognition to the role of women in science that they can play in achieving sustainable development. And also to show that we have to remember women who are known and unknown, remembered and forgotten, who forged the way for us in science today, and to give the children a chance to choose from role models in science. So after 5 years, and this is the 6th year, I think we did amazing work at the United Nations with member states. As the main coordinator, the Royal Academy of Science International Trust is the main coordinator of celebrating February 11, and we created from it a global movement. And now the whole world is recognizing the role of women in science in all fields of sustainable development, whether in STEM, whether in social sciences, in economics, in policies, in diplomacy, etc. So I think, yes, now it was like a wake-up call. And now, yes, women are more than, particularly women in science, are more than ever recognized for their role. Indeed.
Well, you know, the world is facing the COVID-19 pandemic, and also at the forefront are women scientists who are said to have been particularly hard hit by this pandemic. Now, how can women in this sector leverage on this much needed recognition?
With the COVID-19, the pandemic, it showed the strength, the importance of science. It showed how many women in science worked hard, attracted the attention of into women in science, developing from diagnostic kits to treatment, to play a role in the vaccines, etc., and even in the treatment. And this is by itself, it showed how important it is to have equal opportunities, to include women in science in every part of research, to invest in their talents and to bring them at the front. And last Thursday, on February 11, I dedicated the 6th International Day of Women and Girls in Science to our fellow women in science colleagues who are working hard to save people's lives, and also to the souls of those who lost their lives while in duty. And this is by itself, it shows that how women in science are leading courageously in all fields, whether as teachers, whether at healthcare professional, at scientific laboratories, everywhere. So really, it shows how much the world needs women in science, their importance even for reviving economy.
All right, and just finally, it appears the gender stereotypes are changing, but here in Africa, you know, gender roles are still a big issue. How can communities go about changing this narrative?
What Africa needs here, we need to look at African women in science who are outside African countries, how they can help creating work within Africa. We need also for us who are not African, to create collaboration with our African colleagues. We need to create a momentum where our colleagues from Africa can present their work and shine with their achievements internationally. Last February in 2020, we managed to get 20 African women in science to the United Nations. That was a very big achievement to bring African women, let the world hear about them, about their work. So, in fact, they were amazing, and we all stand up for them with respect and applaud and their work. Their vision is incredible. So, in fact, we need also to create that kind of support of collaboration, between North and South and South and North. So this is, once we do this, to bring the international recognition for the achievements of African women in science, I think African women, they are already shining stars, and they will lead other scientific achievements, or they will lead in everywhere. Now, like with the big news, the World Trade Organization, the chief of it is a woman and an African woman. What do we need more than that?
Indeed, what do we need more than that? We'd like to thank you, Dr. Nesreen El Hashimite, the Executive Director of the Royal Academy of Science International Trust. And that's it on the program for today and for the week. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm Layo Adegoke. Have a lovely weekend.